There we go. All right. Welcome to another session of Getting to Know Dynatrace. I'm your host, David Jones. Everyone calls me Jonesy. And I certainly hope that wherever it is that you are tuning in from, that it is warmer there for you than it is here for me. Because let me tell you, it's a cold day outside, but spring is in the air. Spring is in the air, and all sorts of new things always come along with spring. And that's why we love Getting to Know Dynatrace, because we get to talk about all sorts of new things, and we get to talk about all sorts of things that you may not have known about. So, as with every session of Getting to Know Dynatrace, we're going to start off with a couple of segments, and then we're going to get into our demonstration today. So let me start by sharing my screen here, and let's get that going. Here we go, and starting... Here we are, Getting to Know Dynatrace, cloud done right. And the first segment, as we always do with Getting to Know Dynatrace, is what's new. All right, so let's dive into this session's what's new at Dynatrace. As always, if you are looking to find out what's new about Dynatrace, go to dynatrace.com/news/blog, and you're going to find out everything that's new that's going on here at Dynatrace. As a matter of fact, I'm going to flip over there real quickly right now, and let's have a look at some of the blog articles that we currently have up on the blog that you would probably want to give a read to. So right off the bat, you can see here that we're still, there's lots of content that's come off of our Perform conference. I'll actually come back to that in a moment, but there's a great article here on SLOs done right. Do you know what an SLO is? SLO, it sounds like jargon. SLO is a service level objective. And so basically with SLOs, what you can do is you can define rules to actually define what constitutes good performance, good behavior, bad behavior. And then you can actually use these SLOs to help drive automation within your apps. And so here's a great blog article that actually goes through and talks a little bit more about what some of the things that you should be considering when you're actually setting up SLOs. Now, there's all sorts of other articles on the blog that I highly recommend that you read. You can see here that we've got this Tech Transforms blog article. There's an announcement about how Dynatrace can be used for monitoring OS level services. So what's an OS level service? So have you ever gone into Microsoft Windows, and you know how in Microsoft Windows you have all these background services that are running? That's an example of an OS service. So there's a whole blog article that talks about how Dynatrace can be used to monitor OS services. Now, the other thing to remember, I talk about all the time when we go through the What's New section about going into the blog, reading these articles, fabulous information, but there's actually other places that you can go to find out stuff that's new at Dynatrace. For example, if you're actually within the Dynatrace platform, so you're actually looking inside of Dynatrace, if you go into the upper right-hand corner here and you click on this little person icon, you can see here that there are the release notes. And so now you have access to all of the different things that are new. And the best thing about Dynatrace is that we're constantly innovating on the platform. Every 2 weeks, there is a new update to our SaaS platform. Once a month, there's an update to our managed deployment models. You can go into any one of these release notes here, and you can see where we're actually adding product news, new features, and enhancements. So always, I recommend that you go in there and have a look at these. Now, if I go back here for a second, I called your attention to that because one of the things that just got announced, I'm super excited about, and that's this new capability that we're calling ownership teams. Now, if you're familiar with Dynatrace in the past, one of the things that you may have heard about is something called a management zone. We've used management zones as a way of being able to segment off what you're seeing in Dynatrace for a different audience. So you could have management zones that are tied to effectively the work of a specific team. So any of the entities that are part of a specific team, you could basically define a management zone so when that team logs in, all they get to see are the things that they're responsible for within that management zone. So we thought that there's some innovation opportunities here, and one of those innovation opportunities is this new ownership teams. And this is an example of one of the reasons why large organizations, complex organizations, big organizations that have hundreds, if not thousands of people, love Dynatrace, is because Dynatrace allows them to operate in a fashion that lets individual teams only focus in on the stuff that they're responsible for. Here's a perfect example. So imagine you're a bank. A bank has different divisions. You have people that are doing retail banking, people that are doing business banking, people that are doing corporate cash management, people that are doing wealth management. There's all sorts of different teams inside of a bank. This ownership teams allows the developers, the teams, the SREs that are only responsible for certain portions or certain applications to be able to only see those entities for those parts of their organization. This is huge for any large organization that's using Dynatrace. So I wanted to call that out in particular. I typically don't go into new specific features, but this one I thought was super important because it's just so critically important in the way that people utilize Dynatrace. Now, we're going to move on to the next segment. Next segment is Did You Know? Now, this week's Did You Know segment, basically, I'm going to focus around, did you know that Dynatrace can monitor network information? This is something that you may or may not be aware of, but Dynatrace actually allows you to monitor network information. And as a matter of fact, as part of that Dynatrace One agent, there is a network monitoring component that does a little bit of what we call PCAP. Now, PCAP, again, some jargon, that stands for packet capture. And so what we're doing is we're actually having our agent monitor the network traffic, and it allows us to capture those packets. And we actually do a small amount of analysis on those packets so that we can actually find out if there are networking issues. Do you have TCP retransmissions? Are you having network quality issues? Any sort of network situation like that is going to be automatically detected by that one agent. In addition, when you start deploying Dynatrace out onto multiple hosts and multiple servers, it will automatically allow you to start understanding the network flow and the network traffic between those servers, as well as the processes on those servers. Now, not a lot of people know that Dynatrace actually automatically does this network monitoring. The reason I bring it up was earlier today, I was sitting on a conversation with a partner of ours called Gigamon. And we're going to make some announcements in the near future about what we're doing with Gigamon and network monitoring. It is super exciting. The whole concept here of what we're talking about, where the Dynatrace One agent does that network monitoring, now we're going to be able to expand that out. And we're going to be able to monitor net flows using Gigamon across your organization for on-premise based applications, but also being able to tie into those cloud logs that will allow us to basically see the network traffic that's happening at a VPC level inside of the cloud. This is super exciting and super new functionality that we're leveraging our new Grail data lakehouse along with a partnership in this particular case with Gigamon. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil that. We'll set that up for another session of getting to know Dynatrace in the future. And then finally, the last piece I wanted to talk about on Did You Know was, did you know that we actually had our Perform 2023 conference back in February? Of course you knew that. If you've been watching Getting to Know Dynatrace, I've been talking about it quite a while. But if you're new to Getting to Know Dynatrace, we had our annual user conference back in February. And down here, you can see on dynatrace.com in our resource center, Perform 2023 is where you can access all of that content. So I invite you to go have a look at that content right there. As a matter of fact, we just threw up on the screen a little QR code. Give that a click with your camera phone, and it'll take you directly to that content. So, folks, that's it for the Did You Know segment of Getting to Know Dynatrace. We're going to move on to the best part of Getting to Know Dynatrace. That's the live demonstration. And so this week, our guest solution engineer is Brendan Steiner. So we're going to move things along. We're going to stop sharing here, and we're going to hand things over. So, Brendan, it's now over to you. Why don't you walk us through a demonstration? And while Brendan is setting up to do this, folks, what makes Getting to Know Dynatrace so fun and so interesting, and what makes it just such a great experience are your questions. So please feel free to type in your questions as we're going through this demonstration. Whatever you're using, if you're watching us on Twitch, if you're watching us on Facebook, if you're watching us on YouTube or LinkedIn, just go into that channel there and just start typing away your questions. We'll be able to pick those up, and we'll get and try our best to answer those live. So Brendan, over to you, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonesy. Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Steiner, a solutions engineer based out of Ontario here. So we'll just hop right into the demo because it's always fun to see the live stuff. So what I've got up here is our current demo environment. And for those of you that are, whether you're new in the observability space or you've come from the application monitoring, long before, you've seen a lot of dashboards that look like these, where it has statistics based on your applications, your code level services, your infrastructure, and your databases as well. So with Dynatrace, we're really getting into the full stack monitoring and giving you a full view of your environment. And what makes that possible really is what we call the one agent. So what I've got up here is actually another tab called the Dynatrace Hub. So this is entirely public. As you can see here, I'm not logged in. If you just go to dynatrace.com/hub and you're wondering, I wonder if Dynatrace can monitor that as we're going along here, you can always type in and see, maybe you're looking for an Oracle database, for example. You can see all the solutions we have for Oracle. But to keep this on track, the main thing I want to point out is our one agent. So in the past, what we've done a lot is, we've had to go in and put in, say, JVM arguments or IIS modules, messing around with all the config and YAML files, things like that. So what the one agent really allows us to do is install and deploy rapidly without any config changes. So as soon as you install our one agent, you actually start getting the data, as you can see here. And I'll show this live as well. But you'll start to get the infrastructure metrics. And as soon as you restart your application processes, as you can see, there's one Apache, one here, you'll be able to see that as well. And that's really a difference maker in terms of deploying across a whole enterprise environment. There's been deployments with thousands of one agents where you just roll it out with Ansible or Chef or Puppet, and really automate the solution so you're not up at night deploying these agents.
Brendan, it's funny you mentioned that about how easy it is to install the Dynatrace One Agent. We've had situations where we had one customer, they were able to actually deploy 18,000 agents within a 3-hour period. Wow. Like that, in the past, trying to do that kind of mass deployment is just a significant amount of effort for most organizations. And because of the work that we've put into making the Dynatrace One Agent so easy to deploy and so automated, now we're seeing the benefit of that. We're seeing organizations that can actually deploy that number of agents in that short of a period of time. We've even seen situations where people will take the Dynatrace One Agent and they'll bake it into their machine images. And so what happens when you do that, whenever you create a new virtual machine off of that machine image, it doesn't require any effort, because as soon as that new machine image comes live, the agent's part of that deployment, it automatically starts sending telemetry back to Dynatrace. So, thanks for pointing that out, Brendan. That's a really good point about how easy it is to deploy that Dynatrace One agent.
Yeah, especially in the cloud with auto scaling and things like that. You want to know when a pod goes up and down, and it may be normal, but you need a certain amount of instances running. The one agent will always be on there, and you can alert based on how many pods are running as well. So just trying to make it as easy as possible with Dynatrace. That's why I love it.
All right, keep going, brother.
Awesome. Yeah, and once the one agent is installed, you get of course, all of these good metrics and data. But something really cool I always love to show is this Smartscape. So what the one agent does is automatically map the dependencies in your environment. So this is something that we see a lot of customers using in terms of when they're migrating to the cloud, or maybe they acquire new software, or even old software that's been around 10, 15 years that the developers aren't around anymore. So what went into the application, what talks to what. And Dynatrace does this all automatically. So if I scroll in here, you can actually see the connections between all of the different entities here. So you can see we've got Google Cloud Functions all the way to Go, Netty. So whatever the technology may be, you're able to see that here, as well as the topology map. So what this is used for largely is to populate CMDBs, such as ServiceNow. It really takes out the manual effort of going through and looking at all your servers yourself, as well as, what if a server got decommissioned in that time and a new one was brought up. So since the one agent is constantly running, it's going to be constantly updated, and you're going to have a real-time view of your environment of really N+1. And what I mean by that is, as long as you have a one agent, it will actually show a connection out to a server that doesn't have a one agent as well. So it will identify that, and maybe that's a candidate to put monitoring on, or maybe not, but you'll know the connection is there. So really, really cool stuff. And maybe I can focus in on the data centers here to show something really cool. Let's see West Europe, for example. So again, all out of the box, no configuration. What Dynatrace does is really have it in this hierarchy of the data center containing hosts, and I can click in and view my Linux and Windows hosts there, and then up into the processes. So these are application processes. So we have some Java here, some Linux processes, and some Apache, and they go all across the board. And you can actually see what code level that feeds as well. So it looks like we got some messaging services here in Azure. And from there, you can see exactly which applications they feed as well. So into our mobile app and into our normal web app as well. So all of this was done just from installing the one agent. It's pretty crazy, but the more complex the environment, the more Dynatrace prospers.
Hey, Brendan, just for a second there, because
Yeah.
you've brought up a super interesting example.
Mm-hmm.
So you've just shown where the one agent, okay, is being used to discover all of these entities on these hosts. But what's over on the right-hand side?
Over on the right-hand side, let's see here.
Look at all these. What are
Azure
these
API.
guys?
So it looks like these are all Azure integrations. So
Yeah.
yeah. And what we do with all of the big cloud providers, and thank you, Jonesy, for pointing these out, is we actually bring in data from the API as well, or any integrations, say through Azure, GCP, AWS, whatever it may be. We're cloud agnostic, and import all of that data in here. And you can see it's actually connected back into the on-premise as well. So, whether your applications are totally on-prem, in the cloud, a hybrid of both, Dynatrace recognizes that and brings all that information together as well. Because to Jonesy's point, you can't install one agent everywhere. There's IoT devices out everywhere. And as long as they're generating data or logs or whatever it may be, we can import it into Dynatrace and make it smarter. So it's really versatile in that.
So the idea is
Hmm.
that basically, that agent, that's great when you're installing it onto a host, something that you can touch, but there are a whole set of serverless capabilities that the cloud provides. There are supporting services that the clouds supply,
Yeah.
and by connecting to things like for example, Azure Monitor, or connecting into your CloudWatch subscription, we can ingest those metrics from those entities, and actually they're going to show up in this entity map, this Smartscape. Really cool. Thanks for showing that, Brendan. Keep going,
Yeah.
man.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, no, thanks, Jonesy. And this is the Smartscape is an amazing visualization to show what the one agent does in the background and import all that data. But then, what do you do with all that data? It's on the dashboard, it's in Dynatrace. Well, one of the most powerful things about Dynatrace is the AI, which is called Davis. So what the AI does is it takes in all of this information, and rather than doing correlation, it does causation. Do I have that in the right order, Jonesy?
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. No. All right.
Yeah.
So, how would you describe the difference between correlation and causation?
Um, well, there's always your famous website that shows a trends of two things happening to line up. So it may be that a movie star gets coffees on Mondays, and if he gets a macchiato, maybe your application goes down. Versus if a latte, your application performs well. That's something that may be correlation, right? Two events happening that happen to line up. They may be related, they may not be. But in terms of causation, it's really looking at the data and saying, okay, all of these are actually related. We understand the entity model and the topology model from top to bottom and also horizontally, as you saw in the Smartscape, and really looking at the issues. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it exactly. And thanks for pointing out that website I love so much. It's called Spurless Correlations or something like that.
Mhm.
It's just so much fun where you can actually, map together trends of data that, clearly look like they are, having events occurring at the exact same point in time, but are completely unrelated and meaningless, like the margarine sales to the divorce rate in Maine, like that kind of stuff. Just because the data is shaped the same way doesn't mean that there's any correlation whatsoever. And
Mhm.
causation is very much about understanding the relationship between entities and the fact that this data is in fact actually causing an issue. Oh, hey, look,
Yeah.
Lane Pierce actually dropped that link
Awesome.
onto the chat window there. Yeah, have fun with that. I love that site. I always look at it and chuckle. All right.
Yeah,
Hey,
that's
you
a
know
great
what,
one.
Brendan, keep going because we're at a really important part of this, which is,
Mhm.
I think, the practical example of what that AI does.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the what we call a problem card. So what I've done here is filter in the top, just looking at today, and there's currently 35 problems that Dynatrace has identified or Davis has identified. So I'll actually sort here by the most affected to show really the power of Dynatrace, and I'll take the second one for a degradation. And I'll really walk through this in terms of what exactly Dynatrace shows. And you see these metrics all the time on dashboards, whether SLOs were affected, any infrastructure, servers, things like that. But as opposed, on a dashboard, you're looking, okay, is this normal? That may be relevant to you, knowing what's normal or not. But what Dynatrace actually does is it takes in all the information from your environment, and it starts analyzing and sets an auto detected baseline. So at the bottom here, you can see the current response time, 900 milliseconds, exceeds the auto-detected baseline of 312 milliseconds. Now, of course, you could always set static thresholds in Dynatrace, but what we believe to be more powerful is this auto-detected baseline alerting based on deviations from the baseline there. So detecting what's normal for your application and alerting when it deviates from that. So really cool stuff. And just to take you through this problem card, you got the title here, user action duration degradation. So it looks like we had a response time increase, and it will show you your impacted entities. And something really cool is it will show what Davis actually analyzed as well for this problem card. So we're looking at over 18,000 monitored entities. So you think when it comes to humans solving the problems and solving those issues, your mean time to resolution, Dynatrace helps with that a lot, because how can you look at 18,000 different entities and know what's connected or not? So really taking the complex world and putting it into this problem card for you to look at and remediate any issues. So, and on the left side, we have a business impact analysis, which I can show more on later, that really goes down and views it from a user experience perspective. So what this is looking at the web browser or the mobile application on your phone and seeing what the user really saw when they tapped on something, when they clicked on something. You know, was there a rage click, an error, they couldn't continue? And you can actually replay sessions as well, so you don't have to ask them to recreate the issue. A lot of the times what we see in say support or call centers is, once they have the user's information, they can go back and look at their session and see exactly where it went wrong. So it's very, very powerful for that.
Hey, Brendan, hold on for a second. You used a term there, and I want you to take a moment and explain what you meant by that. You said a rage click. What's a rage click?
So, say I'm clicking on this button here and it's just not loading, and I just click away and it's just not going there. So, anything that's frustrating on the page, even though, maybe I take it out on this icon over here, but just clicking fiercely and aggravated that the page isn't loading. I expect it to load in, just a few seconds. I'll be reasonable there. It doesn't have to load like that. But, if I'm sitting here for 30 seconds, I start to nod off. So.
And so that's really interesting. Can I find out across all of my pages, all of my actions, because we actually describe things as user actions. Can I find out across all of my user actions which page or which user action is getting the most number of rage clicks?
Yeah, exactly. And what this will do is give you a whole application overview of what your application looks like, how it's performing in terms of user experience, which pages are performing poorly or highly based on AppDex, which is the application index, which you can set timings on for your application of what's, successful, tolerating, frustrating for users. So as well as down to the individual actions of these sessions here, which I can open up in a new tab and just see, okay, look, we've got different users here that we pulled out metadata for your information, as well as anonymous in case, there's any PII data in there. But if I click on any of these here, let's get one that's got a bit longer of a duration, or let's remove my time frame to last 30 minutes. Let's look at one that's been going on today. So we got Lena here. And we can see she's got 2 sessions going on and 6 user actions in this count. So what's really cool about this is you're able to see everything that the user has in terms of, what's their operating system? What browser were they using? Should they be using Chrome versus Safari 9? Maybe there's recommendations that you could make more clear on your website. But this is the really powerful stuff of looking at the different actions that were made on the page or the mobile app, and say I want to click deeper into this loading of page. You're going to get a full waterfall breakdown. And what I mean by that is it's going to take a look at not only the load action of the page, but it's going to give you a full view of all the requests that are in there as well. We've seen a lot from, there's Twitter, Facebook, third-party content, first-party content. That's all going to be in here detailing what took the time of your request. So what you can do here is really troubleshoot and narrow down into, have I got a picture that's not being compressed? Have I got a style sheet that's not being loaded for some reason and the page looks all wonky for users? So really, really powerful, cool stuff, as well as a bunch of recommendations on the top here to say, okay, here's something we noticed, but maybe you could optimize some images or compress some text resources. So some health keeping stuff there as well.
Got it. Cool. Hey, Brendan. You know what? Let's just take a pause for a moment, because I understand that we've got we've got a whole list of questions that have popped up, and this is awesome. This is what we love about getting to know Dynatrace.
Yeah.
So first question is, somebody asked the question about what did you call the alternative to managed zones, or so the management zone capability is still within Dynatrace. One of the things that we're now offering is something that's going to be called ownership teams.
Mhm.
So if you want to find out more about it, and Brendan, why don't you show people where they could go? You go into the upper right-hand corner to the little person icon, go into the release notes. Pardon me, folks. Sorry about coughing. If you go into the Dynatrace SaaS, the latest release notes there, it actually describes now this new ownership functionality right here. So, folks, if you want to find out more about this new capability, that's where you go to find out. Great question. Thank you very much for that.
Awesome.
We've got another question, I think, coming up.
Mhm.
How to handle incident management? That's a good question.
Yeah. So with Dynatrace, the incidents are all really put into these problem cards, and you can take these problem cards and actually put them into, either Slack, Teams, or even if you're more advanced, putting them into your ticketing tools such as ServiceNow, Remedy, anything that we can get a webhook into as well. We have official integrations for ServiceNow, but of course we can pair with anything else. And what this allows us to do is really import that into ServiceNow, and the ticket gets assigned to the correct teams. And then they're able to go into Dynatrace and troubleshoot and see the issue, or even if it's an issue that is more related to, say, memory or a CPU, there may be an Ansible job or a Puppet job that can run as well, and get you to a completely automated state where you have Dynatrace installed on your application. It recognizes an issue. It raises the ticket into ServiceNow, which then gets relayed to the appropriate teams or into Ansible, and then it gets resolved. And you can actually see it in a comment on this problem card as well. So you can push it back into the API and say, okay, this was resolved by Ansible job XYZ. And it's really, really cool stuff. So really the sky's the limit with Dynatrace in terms of getting those problem incidents and integration. It's really what we're capable of. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. All right. Do we have how does auto remediation work? So
Yeah.
that's a super interesting question. I'm gonna grab this one if you don't mind for
Sure.
a second.
Yeah.
Actually, while I do that, could you do me a favor, Brendan, and open up the deployment event on the root cause? We're going to come back and describe the root cause in a moment, but I'm bringing this up because in a moment, what's going to happen is you're going to see here that there is a reference in this to a remediation piece. And that remediation piece, you can see there's a link in it to Ansible Tower. So typically, the way that auto remediation can work with Dynatrace is we can work with other tools. So whether or not you're using things like ServiceNow or Ansible, whatever it might be, when Dynatrace sees a problem, it can be used to automatically trigger a remediation event. And so that remediation event would typically be executed through something like ServiceNow or something like Ansible. So Ansible and ServiceNow both have frameworks, and there's other tools out there that do this that can be used for running a remediation script. And a remediation could be anything from, as an example, to modifying a configuration, to bouncing a process, to bouncing a host or a server. Now, the interesting part of this is that if you were and have seen some of the content that we were talking about from our Perform conference, you would have seen Bernd, our CTO, actually talking about our new workflow engine. And now this new workflow engine that's going to become part of the platform is going to allow you to actually create all sorts of different auto remediations that can be run directly from within Dynatrace itself through this workflow engine. And that could be anything from actually driving configuration changes through your cloud API to configuring in certain cases maybe settings at a CDN level, to running Ansible for that matter, or running something from ServiceNow. Those capabilities will always be there as part of the platform, but it's just going to expand all of the different options that you have when it comes to executing this remediation. And this remediation, auto remediation, this is all about shifting right. This is about self-healing. And this whole new workflow engine is going to open up a whole set of exciting new possibilities that are going to be driven by the Dynatrace platform. So that was a fabulous question. Thank you very much for that. Let's see, what else do we got? Other questions? Or yeah. How do we group related processes as a business event? So this is a really interesting question. I'm going to take a part of a pass on this question, and I won't leave you hanging though. And the reason I'm taking a bit of a pass is that's can be a whole session of getting to know Dynatrace in and of itself, and we should do that for a future session. However, in the interim, let me just grab this link here and let me paste it into our studio. I'm just going to put this into our chat here, and we'll get this link posted into the chat windows. You'll see it coming up shortly. It actually is, in this particular case, how to use Dynatrace for business analytics. And so business events is a new capability, and business analytics is a new capability that's built on top of our Grail framework. And so what I'll do is I'm just going to forward you to that documentation for the moment. But in the future, to be fair, like I said, this could be, just a entire session of getting to know Dynatrace just on this topic alone. All right. Thank you for that question, because it's a good question and it just deserves way, way, way more time than what we have here today. Yeah. What else? Do we have any other questions here?
I don't.
Nope, we're good. Okay, Brendan, keep going. So let's get back. We were still on that problem card, weren't we? Because there's stuff still to talk about on that problem card that we never did.
Yeah. So, now that we've talked about more of the left side and what's going on over here, let's get into really the most important part of the problem card, the root cause. This is what you come here looking for most of the time. Instead of just blaming the network teams outright, you can give them proof that it's them this time. No, but this time it looks like it was due to a code change. So you can see the root cause that Dynatrace analyzed. And, as Jonesy was mentioning earlier, it's actually related to this deployment event. So if I take a look at the time of this, this was about 2 a.m. So this is something that's really cool for Dynatrace I've heard it from customers as well, where they're doing a deployment at night. And since they have it totally set up through ServiceNow and Ansible, they're able to sleep soundly through the night. The job or the deployment gets rolled back, and they can wake up and deal with it in the morning without anyone being impacted. So really cool stuff there. But what happens when you come here in the morning? You can click down and actually view this check destination service. And this is where the developers can come in and say, okay, I've had a really slow response time. Let me look at that in deeper values. So, there's a deployment change event that Dynatrace recognized it was deployment, thanks to the integrations we have. And you can see the response time jumped up from normal there. And if I want to look into that deeper, I can click on this Analyze Response Time degradation here. And that's going to give me really a breakdown of where my response time is, being increased. So it looks like no integration or no interaction with queues, no database usage, but on the service execution, which was the code, you can drill down into that and see exactly what methods are taking the longest. So in here we have the hierarchy, but I more so use the hotspots tab to say, okay, look, this calculate section index was actually taking the most time. And then you're able to take that back into your development cycles and say, okay, this wasn't acceptable, let's improve that. So, with just a few clicks from, we've got an issue down to the code level of this method is the issue, is the power of Dynatrace. And really, we're trying to make lives easier here in terms of this is the issue and now you can fix it as well. And the last really, really cool thing that I love to show from problem cards is called the visual resolution path. So I might make this bigger here. Zoom in, close this. So what we've got here is really a topology of all of the entities that were affected. So you can see how they interact here, and you can actually play back the problem evolution. So you can see originally we've got some services lighting up in red that affect the website and other services as a whole, all the way down to the infrastructure. So, if I just forward to, say, the highest point here, go back one, and pause it. So, what we're seeing is everything's lit up red in terms of what's having an issue. So when you get these alerts, maybe you have alerting tool for your infrastructure, alerting tool for Apache, Tomcat versus Apache versus Nginx versus your front end website customer experience, and having all those tools segregated in different places. They may excel at what they do, but the data isn't in context. And what Dynatrace does is take all of these and say, okay, we've got 48 ongoing events in 12 different components. You don't want 12 different alerts going into ServiceNow for the same issue. So what Dynatrace does instead is it recognizes that this is one issue combined together, and that our check destination backend code was really the cause of it, and everything else was a symptom. But it's still rolled up into one problem that needs to be resolved. So it really takes out the alerting storms and the war room of pointing fingers of, I'm all green on my side, I'm all green on my side. You go around the table, everyone's green. Okay, well, someone has to be red. And this really helps visualize that. So you don't have to draw it out on a whiteboard yourself. Yeah, really, really cool stuff here. Awesome. So I think I see another question that's come in.
We did? Okay.
Let's see. So can I trigger a script automatically from Dynatrace to restart a JVM if a problem is identified to a high JVM memory usage? Yes, exactly. And those are exactly the use cases that you'd use Dynatrace for. It really, you set up the integrations between Dynatrace and the alerting tools. And with the newer workflows that Jonesy mentioned that's coming, you'll be able to do it more directly in Dynatrace. But for the time being, that's still definitely possible. Yeah.
Excellent question.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions coming up? In our architecture, there are some SaaS solutions where the one agent installation is not possible and it's breaking end-to-end visibility. How do we fix it? So this can be a great question, and this can be challenging for any organization where you've got a SaaS tool. A perfect example could be something like APIgee, right? As an example, where part of your application, maybe you're capturing RUM information for that end user, but it's going off into APIgee endpoints, which are then going back into your core business application, and going from that end user through, say, something like APIgee. So that's just one example of a scenario where that could potentially happen. Another example could be, for example, things like even internal devices and appliances, like something like a data power device, as an example. There are technologies that may be able to help, specifically something called W3C trace context. So the whole concept of W3C trace context is for you to have a header that will persist across technologies. And so that conceptually could be an option if that SaaS vendor, if that SaaS solution, in fact, actually supports it. So that's something that you might want to, I would think that you would want to investigate. Now, there's some other things that you could potentially do as well. And that actually goes back to the business events that we were talking about before, because I know that I've talked to our product manager, Klaus, about this, and he's showing me some really interesting examples where it may not allow us to actually do the end-to-end tracing, but I could still understand how the relationship between what's happening on the SaaS tool is related to the transactions that I do have visibility into. And the way that this is being done is going to be done at the log level. And so if that SaaS tool allows you to get access to the logs of the transactions, then there are potentially other options that you could investigate. It's a it's a great question, and it is in certain circumstances really nuanced depending upon the technology framework that frameworks that are being deployed.
Mhm.
What do you think, Brendan? Anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, no, that was great. The only other thing I think of is, maybe we can't deploy one agent, but maybe there is an extension for it. My favorite that I've come across recently is this Salesforce
Oh, the
Streaming
Salesforce
API.
streaming one. That's
Yeah.
a perfect example.
Mhm.
The Salesforce Streaming API extension that we have. Describe it, Brendan.
Yeah. So what it does is before, of course, we can install a one agent on Salesforce servers. It's a SaaS solution. So instead, what we used to do was pull information from the API and get whatever we could. But as I understand it, we've worked more closely with Salesforce, and they've opened up the information that we can actually pull out of it. Not just a Dynatrace, but all the observability information. So then what we can do with that is actually get a closer look into the user sessions, as we've shown before with the different user actions, and actually pull in how Salesforce is performing, and keeping it honest to its SLAs and everything like that. So they've been a really good partner in terms of opening up, and there's an integration that you actually install from Salesforce, and it is able to pass all this data to Dynatrace. So there may be a solution like that as well. I just really like the Salesforce one because it's really cool the way we import the data and organize it. So, yeah.
It is a great example. Thanks for bringing
Mhm.
that up. And so many people are using this.
Mhm.
Is there an APIgee extension for Dynatrace? That's actually, is there something on the hub for APIgee?
Let's see. Oh yeah, APIgee Edge and Google APIgee. So it looks like there is some options for that. I haven't worked with them myself, but there's definitely options to pull that information. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just remember that this may, in fact, actually be pulling metrics from Apogee directly, as
Mhm.
opposed to what I was talking about, where you'd be trying to persist a header using a persistent header like a W3C trace context header across different technologies. So just keep that in mind. But
Mhm.
certainly have a look at that. Certainly
Yeah,
have a look at that.
definitely.
So,
Always
hey,
good to see.
Brendan, you know what? I feel like I want to go back and actually do a little bit more for the question that somebody asked about, can I trigger a script automatically from Dynatrace to restart the JVM related to high JVM memory usage?
Mhm.
There was a piece to that response that I want to go back and we should drill into a little more. Could you show how we would go about and set up, say, like a custom alert as an
Absolutely.
example? Because that custom alert would be based off a very specific metric or SLO, and it's that's going to actually trigger what we're talking about. So let's just show people where that's found.
Yeah. Exactly. So in our case, we have a bunch of different anomaly detection, whether it's for web applications, databases. So if you take hosts, for example, this is exactly where you'd find those thresholds. And so you can see all the alerting is turned on and it's all turned to automatic as well. So what you could do if you want to make this more personable, of course, is you could change it to your own static thresholds. But really, that's where we would make the settings first of all. These are the default ones. Yeah.
Hold on, actually, Brendan, scroll up to the top for a second. Scroll
Yeah.
up to the top for a second. We should call this out. We should call this out because this is
Yeah.
actually important for people to know.
Mm-hmm.
You see the yellow bar there? What does it say?
Your user does not have necessary write permissions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So this is
Mm-hmm.
clearly when you're using Dynatrace in a situation where you've got a large organization, um, different users of Dynatrace are going to have different access and different privileges. This is a basic requirement, because you can't have everyone just going in and being able to change everything and anything that they want to. That doesn't fly in a large organization. This actually just shows that functionality, where in this case, this instance of Dynatrace is kind of locked down. Like, even we don't have the right permissions to actually go in and make the changes on this screen. So I just wanted to call that out. I think it was a good opportunity to do that. Keep going, Brendan, though, and show us the rest of how this is done.
Oh, that is a good point. Security is of the utmost importance. Yeah. So then you have your metrics, as well as alerting profiles. So after we set up, what may be a custom or an automatic thresholds, you can then turn it into an alerting profile, which then essentially would be filtering based on your application, technologies, whatever it may be. So in this case, we're focusing on Kepton, which is an automation tool, and it really shows, okay, if anything's unavailable, or say after resources, send an alert after 0 minutes. So what you could configure here is say, I need to know that the issue is ongoing for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes in order to get an email. So what Dynatrace would do is, say if you set this to 10, it would raise it up, and you'd see it in the problem notifications here in the top right. We've got 2. But if it hasn't hit that 10-minute mark, you wouldn't get an email, or it wouldn't be raised as a ticket. So it gives you a little bit of a breathing room to say, okay, maybe there's little blips along the way, and not being too sensitive. So, and then you can add in filters as well, matching any of those problems. So really versatile in terms of that. And then after you've configured that, you'd come down to the integration. And that's really where we'd get into it. So we have our different problem notifications here. And as you can see, there's a custom integration that's looking into deployment changes. There's a Jira integration, PagerDuty, ServiceNow. So really, with all these different integrations, we're connecting it to a webhook. And there's a few different options here for security, SSL certificate, webhook settings. But you're able to push the data from Dynatrace into ServiceNow or into PagerDuty, whatever you may have that's really managing your ticketing. And from there, you run your Ansible job or your Puppet job to say, okay, restart my JVM. Dynatrace has said that our CPU or our memory is higher than 90%, and restart it. So, yeah.
And Brendan, can someone control this programmatically?
Sorry, not sure.
No, like, so could someone, if I'm if I'm very big into sort of like programmatic management of my applications, where I'm using things like, oh, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some of the ones off the top of my head. I'm having one of those moments. I just brought up that example. Terraform as an example. Like,
yes.
Can I control all these settings programmatically?
Yes, absolutely. You could as well. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So we've got like maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Brendan, actually, you know what? Before we leave, do you have a moment to really quickly just sort of hop into the logs and just show us some stuff there?
Absolutely. The new stuff with the logs is always exciting. So what I'll do is actually remove this problem filter and run the query again there. Actually, what I might do is add some more filters here. So let's see, status, I believe it is. Status, error. So we're going to focus in on errors. And let's look for a specific Kubernetes namespace, in this case, prod. So we're using more prod data, focusing in on only errors. So with Dynatrace, what we've recently developed is Grail. I should say recently released, as it's been in development for the last 2-3 years. But really, it's this big data lakehouse where we're storing our logs and soon to be metrics and trace data as well. But it really helps query the data in context. And what I mean by that is, say if I click on this log entry here, you're going to get all the information that comes along with that log, all of the topology data, all of the metadata, anything in that log that really you're looking for will be in this here as well. So say failed to complete the order, looks like there was the credit card could not be charged in this case. And then what you're able to do is look into the metadata and see exactly which process, which host that's associated with. But also really cool is the connectors that we have into it. So this is where the context really comes into play of you can view the distributed trace, or as we call pure paths, and look down into see exactly in the code level what generated that log line. So now in Dynatrace, you can enrich your pure paths to have your logs associated and see, okay, this specific node in my trace generated this log line here. So it looked like everything was okay. But if I go to this Go service, that's where the error was located. So you have all of your information here as well. And as I'm sure you saw on the other screen, there was another button that had View User Session. So you can look at it from two different aspects with those buttons and say, how do I go down and look at it from a code level? But how do I view it from a user experience level as well? And this takes us right into the page of, okay, they had an issue of the loading of page cart checkout, which is a very important page. And it looks like it's frustrating. It generated that log line. And you can see exactly how your business is impacted, from an error in the logs. So really connecting the valuable business data back to the back end and saying, okay, this user was affected by this error and we can get it fixed.
So in other words, what you're saying is, because I can see there's a little blue button there that allows me to see the visual replay, I can go from what did the user see on their screen all the way down through the trace to the log for that specific transaction.
Exactly. And that's, as Jonesy pointed out, this is the session replay feature here, and it is active as we only have it active, I believe, on 50% of transactions. And that's toggable. You can set it to 100%. But what this does is replay the page. So this is our online boutique demo application. So we can see it's loading, it's spinning. Uh-oh, there's the 500 error. And you can actually click back and view on the event that actually caused it, that generated the log as well. So this is that eliminating the need to really redo or recreate the issue.
That's just, you know what, I've been around this industry long enough to know that being able to connect the dots like that in that fashion is not an easy task. And I always, every time I see this, it just totally blows my mind. We had one last question that popped up about security around sensitive data and logs. And that is an excellent question. And let's wrap up with that question. So when it comes to security around sensitive data in the logs, as the logs are being ingested, we have what are called processing rules. Those processing rules can be used to help you filter out anything that you would consider to be PII data, sensitive data for that matter. So those processing rules allow you to actually ingest logs and be assured that you're not having, any PII data in there. Obviously, after the fact, if you do need to do queries to find out if there are, potentially PII data that, is missed, that's how you can use DQL, or the Dynatrace query language. So you could use the Dynatrace query language to go say, hey, if I see a string that looks like a credit card number, we've got to find out, where did that get ingested from? And let's put the processing rules in place to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. So there's, definitely a lot of effort that we're putting around making sure that sensitive data can be addressed appropriately with that log ingestion. And then on top of that, what we've done is we've created a mechanism that allows us to basically, store this information in buckets. And these buckets are eventually going to be tied to those ownership teams that we just talked about, so that only certain people will be able to have access to certain types of logs. So we've been putting a lot of thought and a lot of effort into making sure that logs are going to be handled in a very secure fashion.
Mhm.
All right, folks, it is actually the top of the hour. We're going to have to wrap things up. Brendan, thank you so much for this demonstration. That was great. We got to go into a lot of different things that we don't normally get into. And folks,
Oh yeah.
those questions were fabulous. Thank you so much for those questions. That's what really makes these getting to know Dynatrace sessions so useful. And
Mhm.
before we leave, we've got some announcements that we want to talk about with some future events that are coming up. We've got a future getting to know Dynatrace session that's a little bit special. This special edition of getting to know Dynatrace is all going to be around AI ops. So there is a link there in that little. Oh, yeah, I'm having one of those moments today. I blame the cold meds. That little QR code. So
There we go.
grab that QR code, grab the link off of that QR code, and make sure to tune in. I believe this is going to be April 13th for a special edition of Getting to Know Dynatrace, where we're going to talk exclusively about AI ops. I'm really looking forward to that one. So, folks, make sure to get that on your calendars, and we'll see you then. And Brendan, again, thank you very much, my friend. That
Thank
was
you,
a
Jonesy.
great demonstration. And folks,
Yeah.
take care. And if you're looking to try out Dynatrace, remember, go to dynatrace.com/free trial and take it for a spin. Download or not download. That's showing my generation there. Sign up for the free trial and take it for a spin. Download the One Agent, install it, take it out, give it a try, watch how automatic it is. And with that, have a great day, folks, and we'll see you next time on the next session of Getting to Know Dynatrace.